Hi everyone and welcome to this week's Monday Memo. Now, an idea raised its head recently in the local press here in Ireland, advocating a new model of work, focused on improving outputs and productivity rather than the hours spent at our desks. I mean, if we think about it, COVID-19 has disrupted many of our business norms and opened up our minds to many new ways of working, not just within finance and accounting, but also in businesses in general. And it's probably accelerated some of the agendas, if you think about it, like working from home, flexible working, and so on. Particularly as a lot of us have had to ditch our offices and desks at work and have makeshift home offices that have popped up around all our houses, like our and apartments, like in our bedrooms and our kitchens, in all parts of the world. But could the pandemic be sparking certain changes, like for one that was touted here locally, of a 4-day work week? And another reason why I raise the topic now is I saw a flash poll survey done by the Chartered Institutes of Management Accountants this week, and it asked the question, do you believe a 4-day working week would increase productivity in your organisation? And given a lot of the people answering the survey are in finance already, I was actually surprised 68% of people felt that it would increase the productivity of their organizations by having a 4-day work week. So I thought I'll delve a little deeper and understand, is a 4-day work week something that might work in finance? And if so, what are the pros and cons? Well, it's not really a new idea when I started delving a bit deeper. Actually, in 1930, the economist, some of you might have heard of him, John Maynard Keynes, predicted that Americans in particular would have a 15-hour work week within the next 100 years. I mean, his reasoning was quite straightforward, right? He thought as technology advanced, people would need to work less and less, but that hasn't happened. If we look at the American workers' hours, they've not really budged in the last 50 years. And similarly across the globe, and for us in finance, are we guilty perhaps of working hard, but maybe not as smart as what we should have been, leveraging all these new technologies? And it's not that the will's not there. In Ireland, for instance, it was found that 3/4 of people surveyed want the government to explore doing something with a 4-day work week, and half of employers said that they'd be very open to the idea of having one. And similarly, I saw some research in the States from last year that said 40% of US workers would prefer a 4-day work week. And interestingly, ZipRecruiter, the recruiting firm, found that in its postings, mentions of the 4-day work week were reportedly up 67% this year, particularly as companies are competing to attract top talent. And it was difficult to find early evidence from companies per se that have trialed it and found it successful, but where I was able to find it, I think the most notable one was Microsoft, who trialed it out in Japan and found a 40% boost in the productivity. So what's this case for a 4-day work week? Well, the argument's made that modern technology has significantly sped up the way we work, and therefore the 5-day work week, as Keynes was thinking, is probably no longer necessary. And with the technology improvements and changing work practices in finance, that means that we've been spending less time on lower value activities. We're not as tied to our offices anymore, and maybe have we been guilty of not passing some of those technology gains back on to those doing the work in finance? And whilst this 5-day week we were so used to and brought up on used to be a great model, getting the most out of us probably early in our careers and so on, it was born in an era where it was well before the introduction of any spreadsheet or computer software program for finance and accounting or budgeting or planning. It was done in the first, second industrial revolution, the 19th century factory assembly line, where the 5-day work week was ideal. People could get up, go to work, do their jobs and go home. That's what it was. So what would be the pros for us now of bringing in a 4-day work week in finance? Well, the first thinking I've alluded to is this idea of increased productivity. I mentioned Microsoft. There's been other studies in New Zealand. But interestingly, what's being found is the most progressive shorter week regimes actually entail no salary reductions. And I know that sounds crazy, but for it to be effective, employees need to feel like they're earning the same wage just for the less hours. And that's possible because some other research pointed out to that workers can be just as productive in 30 hours as they are in 40 because they waste less time and are better rested. And interestingly enough, given that in finance we support a lot of decisions and ensure there's better decisions, another study which gave people working 40 hours a week and people working 55 hours a week the same cognitive tests found that the latter group performed far worse. So that would suggest that on sort of complex problems, working longer doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to perform as well on those problems. Then there's the obvious reduced cost, not necessarily from the salary perspective, but employees, for those that have returned to site, will be in the office one less day. But I think it's more the intangible costs that feed through to the P&L in other ways by improving our well-being. So less days sickness. I think there was one study found that 37% of UK businesses had seen an increase in stress-related absence over the last year. You've also got discontented staff distracting their co-workers, and it could also be a very good tool for retaining and competing for top talent, so you're not having to pay out more on signing on fees or so on. The fact of having a 4-day work week actually might pay for itself in reducing some of those costs. Then there's another feeling out there: you get happier employees who will be more loyal to a company. It also improves their well-being and mental well-being. You've got environmental advantages. There was one study that found that with every 1% decline in working hours, there was a corresponding 0.8 percentage points drop in energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. But for all those pros, yes, there's disadvantages. There would have to be massive changes to work process and calendars. A 4-day work week doesn't suit every business model, and particularly departments like finance. If you look at our planning and budget cycles, we tend to make use of every single day in the week we can. Look at the closing period. We map out in detail what we do on each day. We'd have to get very used to adjusting to have a longer period if some of it ran into the weekend. I don't know how many of us have found ourselves in our careers running reports at weekends just to get them done, or staying back late. I remember once having 2 team members who were recording loads of overtime at quarter end, and I suggested to them, look, I'll pay you exactly what you would have lost out on overtime, but I expect you to work no more than 40 hours a week. And lo and behold, they figured out how to do the close within the 40 hours a week. So I guess if we made that a bit more challenging, I think we could probably figure it out. As I said also, that the most effective programs will not be giving employees a lower salary from it. So what you're effectively doing is increasing the cost per hour of finance staff. And that might impact those who are already on part-time work contracts. Well, what do you do in those scenarios? So it does raise some questions there. But I think the key point is separating the hours spent on an activity from the value of that activity. So how many of us actually, when we enhance or introduce a new control, figure out how much that control is worth to the business and pay on the value of it relative to the hourly cost of providing it. So that's what we do in our team, is when we look at these sort of challenges, we put a value on the leakage that control prevents from happening or avoids from happening. And I think we can, again, in finance, put a lot of numbers around these things and talk more about value than cost per hour. And a big one, I think, for those of us, particularly early in our careers, is shorter work weeks will give less development time and opportunities for mentoring, perhaps. Because you've got less time in the week, you might not have that lunch with, say, the finance director you'd intended to, or are unable to meet the finance analyst who wants to pick your brains on some sort of career development challenge that they're having. So that in itself would introduce new challenges, as well as balancing trying to be productive but also doing the important things that come with being part of an organization and fostering good relationships and collaboration around you. So how much would we really benefit from having that extra day back? So look, I suppose I'm probably more optimistic that the pros outweigh the cons of moving to a 4-day work week. But what do you think? It's something we could work with in finance, or do you think it's something that would never happen? Again, really love to hear your views. So put your comments with this post, whether that be on our podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, or on our social media platforms at LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram. So look, hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, We really appreciate when you recommend it to your friends and colleagues. And as always, thanks for investing your time with us today. So until next time, take care of yourselves and let's keep on building our strength in the numbers.